She hired an escort, but a mysterious billionaire CEO arrived instead. And what happened next? Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Susan Ross stepped into the bustling editorial floor of Atlas Now magazine with the precision of a well-tuned clock. Her heeled boots clicked purposefully on the polished tiles as she passed rows of sleek glass offices. At 38, Susan was the youngest editor-in-chief in the publication's history, a woman who balanced poise, ambition, and a fierce determination to maintain the magazine's high standards. Yet even as she moved with unwavering composure, a hint of tension hung over her, like Seattle's perpetually gray clouds. She dropped her leather tote onto her immaculate desk and scanned the proofs spread out for review. A tight schedule loomed. Last-minute articles, urgent photo edits, and design elements awaiting her final say. She thrived in the chaos, priding herself on never missing a deadline. Still, something nagged at the back of her mind, an indefinable unease that had grown stronger recently. Success was her currency, but she wasn't entirely certain it was paying off in all corners of her life. Before she could lose herself in the stack of articles, Rachel Carter appeared at the door with her auburn hair in a casual bob, a steaming mug of cappuccino in hand. "You owe me," Rachel quipped, holding out the coffee. A grin broke through Susan's typically guarded expression. "I'd say I owe you more than one at this point," she replied, taking the mug gratefully. Rachel was the culture reporter, but she also served as Susan's occasional confidant, one of the few people who caught glimpses of Susan's vulnerabilities. "Big night coming up," Rachel reminded, leaning against the glass wall of Susan's office. "The annual Rain City Ballroom Gala. You're set to represent Atlas Now in style, right?" Susan flashed a practiced smile. "Of course," she said, though the idea of the event made her stomach clench. As editor-in-chief, she was accustomed to high-profile appearances, but there was extra pressure this year. Potential investors, major Seattle influencers, and even rumored tech moguls were expected. Everyone would be looking at her, judging not just her professional aptitude, but her personal life as well. Rachel took a sip from her own cup and leveled Susan with a knowing look. "You've got your date all lined up." Susan shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "I'm handling it," she said, trying to sound more self-assured than she felt. Months ago, when she had appeared at a reception alone, whispers circulated. Was Susan Ross so career-driven that she couldn't maintain a relationship? Determined to avoid another round of speculation, she'd decided to hire an escort, strictly professional and discreet. Sighing, she recalled her lightning-fast career ascent. Straight out of grad school, she joined a local paper, then hopped to a bigger publication before landing at Atlas Now. She learned to mask her anxieties under a polished exterior. But as she juggled headlines and features each day, she often felt a subtle ache, as though she was missing a piece of herself. Control was her security blanket, but it also kept her walled off. Rachel set down her mug on the edge of Susan's desk, studying her. "You know, it's okay if you want more than just professional accolades," she said gently. Susan nodded but changed the subject. "Who's covering the tech beat this month?" she asked, flipping through a folder. "I want a piece on Leon Butler's company. If we ever land that interview, Leon Butler is as press-shy as they come," Rachel commented with a laugh. "He rarely shows up anywhere, let alone does interviews. But if he's at the gala, maybe you'll finally cross paths." Susan lifted an eyebrow. "If he's there, I'm sure he'll dodge every journalist in sight." Still, the thought intrigued her. Securing an exclusive with the elusive CEO of Butler Technologies would be a career milestone. The phone on her desk buzzed, interrupting them. It was a reminder about the gala's final guest list. Putting down the receiver, Susan felt a flicker of unease. A second phone alert arrived, the escort agency confirming her booking, reminding her of the lengths she'd go to safeguard her image. As she glanced at Rachel, she forced a confident smile. "All under control," she murmured. Yet deep down, Susan wondered if the restless stir in her chest signaled that maybe, just maybe, everything wasn't as perfectly orchestrated as she wanted to believe. Late that morning, Susan stood in her glass-walled office overlooking Seattle's busy streets. The city was vibrant, despite the drizzle misting the windows. Perpetual rain had a way of energizing locals, herself included. She just ended a terse phone call with the event organizer of the Rain City Ballroom Gala. Her presence there was no casual courtesy. It was practically mandatory for Atlas Now magazine's public image. Sponsors, donors, and top-tier guests would be attending. Her attendance was not just requested, it was expected. Hands clasped behind her back, she paced as she replayed the conversation in her mind. The gala promised headlines, interviews, and countless photo ops, all swirling around the philanthropic cause of funding art programs for underprivileged youth. From a publicity standpoint, it was golden. Yet it also represented a social minefield. One misstep, one ill-chosen word, or even just appearing alone again, and rumors would swirl. She paused by her desk, glancing at a row of framed covers featuring her proudest editorial moments. Normally, she relished major events, opportunities to network with influencers, and make sure Atlas Now snagged prime coverage. This time felt different. She suspected that potential investors watching her that evening might be the same people reading her magazine. Her personal polish had to match the brand's prestige. Her phone pinged with an internal message. "Daniel Coleman wants you at the board meeting in 5 minutes." Daniel was Atlas Now's executive director and someone who'd mentored her during her first months as editor-in-chief. That mentorship often translated into high expectations. Susan grabbed her tablet and hurried down the corridor, her heels tapping against the floor. Inside the boardroom, Daniel waited with 2 other senior executives, all reviewing spreadsheets on glowing screens. Without pleasantries, he gestured for her to sit. "Susan," he began, "the Rain City Gala is a chance for us to deepen connections. The mayor will be there, plus a handful of top tech innovators. We're counting on you to represent Atlas Now with excellence and grace," she finished, forcing a polite smile. "I understand." He leaned forward, folding his hands. "Rumor has it Leon Butler might make a rare appearance. If you manage to speak with him..." His voice trailed meaningfully. Susan nodded, feeling a spike of adrenaline. Interviewing Butler had become something of a white whale for any media outlet. "If he's there, I'll do my best," she said. The meeting ended swiftly, leaving her with a fresh weight on her shoulders. She remembered her plan to bring an escort, Robert from Emerald Escorts, just to keep the gossips at bay. Although it felt somewhat contrived, she believed it was a minor trade-off for a night free of personal scrutiny. Standing near the tall windows, Susan scrolled through her phone to double-check Robert's profile. A tiny voice inside her suggested she might hate orchestrating her personal life this way, but she shoved that thought aside. Returning to her office, she dialed Emerald Escorts. Donna, the agent there, spoke with smooth confidence. "Robert is confirmed for Friday evening. I've emailed you the final details." Susan nodded, mostly relieved. "Great, thank you," she replied. After hanging up, she tapped her phone nervously, scanning her schedule, final editing tasks, a quick trip to her stylist, and then the gala. Rachel slid into the office just as Susan ended the call. "Confirmed you're +1. I take it." Susan shrugged nonchalantly. "Yes, better safe than sorry, right?" Rachel studied her with a wry grin. "I suppose. Just don't spend the night overthinking every glance that comes your way." Susan inhaled, exhaling slowly as she glanced through the rain-streaked glass. "I won't." This is for the magazine, for our image, nothing else. But as she spotted her reflection, her own eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. Was it really just about appearances, or was she grasping at a way to avoid facing her own solitude? Outside, the steady drizzle persisted, a soft reminder that life in Seattle was rarely clear-cut and often demanded an umbrella. Susan closed her eyes and made a silent vow. No matter what happened at the gala, she'd keep her composure. After all, it was just one evening. How unpredictable could it really be? That afternoon, the newsroom's frenetic energy pressed in on Susan from every side. She breezed through rows of bustling desks where writers and editors juggled phones, coffee cups, and frantic deadlines. Normally, she found adrenaline thrilling, but a nagging worry about the upcoming gala kept pricking at her thoughts, like a pebble in her perfectly polished shoe. She slipped into a small, glass-walled conference room for a quick break, only to find Rachel already there, texting on her phone. "Figured you'd need a breather," Rachel said, offering a reassuring nod. Susan sank into a chair, crossing her arms. "Everything's arranged for tomorrow, but it still feels off." She hesitated, considering how much to reveal. "Part of me hates the idea of paying someone just to stand at my side and smile." Rachel shrugged gently. "People do it all the time, especially in our world. It's not like you're faking a relationship, just avoiding needless gossip." Susan bit her lip, tapping her nails on the table. The memory of past events haunted her. Last year, she had attended a high-profile dinner alone. Whispers about her personal life had ricocheted through the press. Even though no article ever confirmed the rumors, the chatter bothered her more than she liked to admit. Rubbing her temples, she reflected on her last serious relationship. It had fallen apart when her partner couldn't accept her driven schedule. Since then, she'd equated emotional closeness with vulnerability and potential failure. Hiring an escort in that sense had seemed like a safe, controlled solution. "You know," she said softly, "if I had someone real in my life, I wouldn't be in this position." Rachel didn't sugarcoat it. "True, but we both know you've been too focused on work for anything else." Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at it before continuing. "Also, heads up, there's talk that Leon Butler might appear at the gala. You've always wanted that interview, right?" Susan nodded, her eyes narrowing in curiosity. The reclusive CEO rarely let his guard down. "I doubt I'll see him," she replied, half hoping to be wrong. Landing a genuine conversation with Butler could elevate Atlas Now's tech coverage, yet her mind circled back to the escort arrangement. "It's not that I'm ashamed," she asserted. "I just don't want any more speculation about my private life." They both fell quiet, the hum of the building's heating system filling the silence. Then Susan's cell phone chimed. A new email from Emerald Escorts confirming final details for Robert's arrival. She glanced at it, feeling an odd pang of apprehension. She should be relieved everything was handled, yet the notion of an unknown variable unsettled her. "I specifically said no surprises," she muttered, recalling her instructions to the agency. She'd wanted Robert thoroughly vetted, but time constraints had kept her from examining his profile in detail. Pushing away the thought, she stood. "All right, I've got articles to review." "Let's just get through the day," Rachel smiled sympathetically, leaving her to settle back into the newsroom's clamor. Yet even as Susan returned to her desk and pored over copy edits, a subtle disquiet lingered. By late afternoon, the horizon outside her window had darkened. Rain streaked the glass. She told herself that once the gala concluded, life would be simpler. She would show up, make a polished appearance, keep speculation at bay, and continue maintaining Atlas Now's reputation. That was the plan. But as she flipped through an article draft, her gaze drifted. The line between personal and professional had never felt so blurred. There was a fleeting thought that maybe unpredictability could bring something valuable into her life, yet she instantly swatted it away. Steady and controlled, that was her creed. Surprises, she reminded herself firmly, always carried too many unknowns, and she'd had enough heartbreak from unpredictability to last her a lifetime. Morning light barely crept through Seattle's overcast sky as Susan hurried into yet another meeting, clutching her laptop and a towering to-do list. She felt the tension in the building before she even reached the conference room. Executives were abuzz about the Rain City Ballroom Gala. The entire publication's image, they insisted, hinged on flawless representation there. Daniel Coleman sat at the head of the table, flanked by senior editors. He offered a brisk nod as she took her seat. "Let's keep this short," he began, scrolling through projected slides. Each bullet point hammered home the event's importance: potential investors, philanthropic partnerships, and media coverage. Susan caught snippets of phrases like high stakes and no room for error. She inhaled, steadying herself against the building pressure. One of the editors, a sharp-suited woman named Kara, eyed Susan pointedly. "You'll be going with a guest, correct? We need to ensure Atlas Now's leadership projects a polished front." Susan forced a composed nod, her voice measured. "Yes, I've arranged for a professional companion." The words left a slight bitterness in her mouth, but she maintained her calm. Anything to avoid another round of speculation about her personal life. Kara continued, "We're counting on the editorial team to leverage any networking opportunities. If you see a chance to talk to Leon Butler," she paused for emphasis, "you grab it." "We've been trying to get inside his company for months." Susan bristled at the word grab, imagining some overly aggressive tactic. She prided herself on respectful journalism, but the pressure to secure exclusives kept mounting. Daniel concluded the meeting with a stern glance around the table. "Remember, we're in the spotlight. Let's deliver results that keep Atlas Now leading the pack." As people rose, Susan caught Daniel's eye. He offered an encouraging nod, yet the weight of his expectations pressed on her. Once alone in the corridor, she exhaled slowly. She had no illusions about how crucial appearances were. Too often, optics overshadowed substance in their industry. Checking her phone, she found multiple reminders of the gala's schedule, arrival time, seat assignment, key figures to greet. The swirl of details made her head spin. Still, she refused to let anxiety show. A quick lunch at her desk provided the only respite. Between bites of a salad she barely tasted, she finalized editorial feedback for an upcoming issue. Her inbox pinged non-stop, PR statements, design proofs, and more confirmations about the gala. Robert from Emerald Escorts would meet her at the Rain City Ballroom entrance promptly at 7. She noted the detail, relief warring with discomfort. It would all be worth it if she arrived arm in arm with someone who could ward off those prying questions about her personal life. Doubts lingered like the city's mist, however. What if something went wrong? What if the arrangement caused more talk instead of less? Gritting her teeth, Susan pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on tasks she could control, like ensuring the magazine's philanthropic coverage was up to par. By late afternoon, the tension in the office seemed to swell. Colleagues scurried back and forth, triple-checking every detail. Even Rachel had traded her casual banter for serious determination. Susan could almost hear the collective heartbeat of the staff, pulsing with a single refrain: "Don't mess this up." Before she left for the day, she stopped by her reflection in a mirrored pillar. Her hair was meticulously styled, her blazer crisp. The reflection stared back at her, revealing a woman who'd ascended the professional ladder by outworking everyone else. Yet behind those assertive eyes lurked the faint anxiety that tonight, of all nights, could unravel her carefully curated image. Breathing deeply, she reminded herself she'd done everything possible to ensure perfection. She had the dress, the escort, the itinerary. Despite the swirl of demands, she wouldn't let them see her crack. Just this one evening, she thought, then life goes on. But as she left the office, a tiny voice inside whispered that life rarely went exactly as planned, especially in a place like Seattle, where clouds could shift at a moment's notice. Susan carefully zipped up the navy blue gown she'd chosen for the evening, its satin fabric catching the soft glow of the bedroom lamp. In front of her full-length mirror, she smoothed out invisible wrinkles, giving herself one final, critical once-over. The reflection gazing back was every inch the sophisticated editor-in-chief, hair in a sleek chignon, discreet diamond studs glinting at her ears, and a confident poise that belied her racing heartbeat. Downstairs, her phone buzzed with a notification from Donna at Emerald Escorts. "Robert is running a few minutes behind," read the message. Susan's pulse skipped. She'd planned everything down to the last detail, yet now there was a hiccup. "I can handle a slight delay," she reassured herself. Besides, the agency promised a top-tier professional known for punctuality and decorum. Stepping outside, she felt Seattle's cool evening air brush her cheeks. The sky was draped in a heavy gray overcast, but the drizzle had paused for the moment. A small mercy. She slid into her car, her driver offering a polite greeting. Her hands curled around a small clutch as she mentally rehearsed the night. Arrive with Robert, make polite conversation, greet the key donors, and dodge personal questions with a measured smile. As they wove through traffic, Susan's mind wandered to the intangible sense of discontent she'd been carrying. Overachieving defined her, but sometimes she wondered if all her achievements filled the lonely space in her heart. Hiring an escort was emblematic of how she managed her life. Every angle calculated, personal matters folded into neat compartments. When her car pulled up to the Rain City Ballroom's grand entrance, paparazzi lights flashed against the looming structure. Susan spotted guests stepping onto a red carpet, all shimmering gowns and black tuxedos. Her phone chimed again. Another text from Donna. "Robert won't make it, but we're sending a highly qualified replacement. He should arrive momentarily." Susan's chest tightened. "This can't be happening," she murmured under her breath, stepping onto the curb. She had no time to argue. The event was already in full swing. Determined not to show dismay, she offered a composed smile to photographers and made her way into the lavish lobby. Chandeliers sparkled, and a soft murmur of refined conversation wafted through the air. Gala staff in crisp uniforms guided attendees into the main hall. Susan paused under a grand archway, scanning for any sign of her replacement. Please be good at this, she thought, torn between frustration and desperation. Then she glimpsed a tall figure in a dark suit near the reception counter, his posture confident yet relaxed. Her heart gave a jolt. Had to be him. She marched over, calling upon her best professional tone. "You must be my escort for the evening. Robert, stand in?" The man turned. He had striking features, a subtle air of authority. For a split second, something odd flickered in his eyes, as if he was about to correct her, but instead he simply nodded. Relief flooded her, though she couldn't shake the sense that his presence felt more commanding than she'd expected. "We're already late," she whispered, motioning him to follow. As they moved toward the grand doors leading into the ballroom, Susan introduced him in hushed tones. "We'll keep it simple. Smile politely, stand by me during the formalities, and let me handle the small talk." The man offered a faint, enigmatic smile. "I'll do my best," he said. His voice held a quiet confidence that caught her off guard. She gave him a quick once-over, noting a refined cut to his suit, the sharp line of his jaw. I guess top-tier replacements really do exist, she thought. Anxiety still gnawed at her, but she pushed it down. The biggest night of her editorial calendar was about to begin. She exhaled slowly, stepping across the threshold into a luminous world of silk tablecloths and hushed elegance. Whatever surprises lay ahead, she told herself, she'd remain calm and collected. Little did she know, the true surprise had only just begun. Susan took a careful step into the Rain City Ballroom's elegant foyer, scanning the arrivals in search of anyone she recognized from the social circuit. The place was breathtakingly opulent, marble floors gleaming under crystal chandeliers, staff in tailored uniforms offering champagne flutes. She was still rattled by the last-minute escort swap, but she tried to shake it off. Appear confident, she told herself. Tonight, her credibility as Atlas Now's editor-in-chief was on full display. Movement caught her eye. Paula Townsend, a poised woman in her 60s known as a legendary event planner, stepped forward with a welcoming smile. Paula was a mainstay of Seattle's high-profile galas, her organizational brilliance rivaled only by her warm presence. "Susan Ross," Paula said, extending a gloved hand. "Lovely to see you. I hear this evening will be quite the show. Big donors, corporate giants, all under one roof." Susan returned Paula's handshake, grateful for the familiar face. "You've outdone yourself again," she replied. "The atmosphere is incredible." Paula gave a knowing smile. "We're just missing a few VIPs." Her gaze flicked around, then settled on Susan's dress. "That navy blue color suits you perfectly, commands attention without being over the top." They chatted about philanthropic initiatives and the magazine's coverage plans. Paula, a mentor figure in Seattle's philanthropic circles, offered gentle counsel. "Remember, your presence here isn't purely business. People want to connect with you personally. Don't be afraid to enjoy yourself." Susan stiffened slightly. Enjoyment was rarely at the top of her agenda. Still, Paula's words resonated, especially after her chaotic run-in with the so-called Escort earlier. She threw a cursory glance around the room, wishing Robert had shown up as planned instead of sending this unfamiliar stand-in. That man, whoever he was, had momentarily vanished into the crowd after stepping inside with her. No sooner had that thought crossed her mind than Rachel's voice reached her from behind. "Hey, boss, you doing okay?" Rachel, camera slung around her shoulder, looked radiant in a simple cocktail dress that allowed her to blend in, yet remain ready for impromptu photos. "I'm fine," Susan replied, carefully adjusting the strap of her evening clutch. "Just trying to spot my date. He's, well, somewhere." Rachel's eyebrow arched in amusement. "Sounds like you two got off on a whirlwind start." "Maybe that's a sign tonight won't be as dull as expected," Susan huffed, suppressing a smile. "Let's hope that's a good thing. By the way, Paula mentioned big names, including Leon Butler. Keep an eye out. If you see him, let me know." Rachel nodded, then wandered off to capture candid shots of high society attendees. Paula excused herself to greet more arrivals, leaving Susan momentarily alone amid the swirling crowd of guests. She felt a fleeting pang of vulnerability, a reminder of why she'd hired an escort in the first place. A moment later, she felt a light tap on her shoulder. Turning, she found him, the tall, suited figure who'd claimed to be her replacement companion. He held 2 champagne glasses, offering her one. "It's hectic in here," he said, his tone warm. "I figured you might like a drink to steady your nerves." Susan accepted the glass, grateful yet wary. She took a slow sip, scanning his face. "I didn't catch your name earlier," she began, mindful that the agency had provided 0 details about this stand-in. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before speaking. "I'm Leon. Pleasure to meet you properly." A gentle hush fell between them. Something about his stance conveyed an effortless authority that felt oddly out of place for a hired escort, but she quickly brushed aside her doubts. She needed him, at least for the evening. "Leon," she repeated, taking another sip. "Well, thank you for stepping in. I was about to go out of my mind with so much happening." He gave a slight nod, gaze thoughtful. "I'm glad I could help." Before she could ask more, another wave of attendees filtered through the foyer, prompting Susan to guide Leon into the main ballroom. She thought of Paula's advice. Maybe tonight wasn't purely about work. Yet it certainly wasn't about letting down her guard either. If only she knew how quickly that line would blur. Leon Butler stood in the bustling lobby of the Rain City Ballroom, still processing the bizarre turn of events that had led him here. He'd arrived expecting a discreet business discussion with a partner in one of the private suites. Instead, a flustered but striking woman had swept him into the ballroom as if he were her official date. His first impulse had been to correct her, to explain that he wasn't any sort of professional escort, but she'd looked so relieved, desperate almost, that he'd decided to play along, just for a moment. That was how he ended up at her side, sipping champagne and navigating polite small talk with various guests. Occasionally, he sensed her watchful gaze, likely evaluating whether he was truly from the escort agency. He had no intention of misleading her permanently, but part of him found this turn of events amusing. After all, he'd spent years dodging cameras and invasive interviews. Playing a completely different role was oddly liberating. At first, he didn't even know her name. She'd introduced herself to a passing acquaintance as Susan Ross, editor-in-chief of Atlas Now magazine, and that had struck him like a bolt. He recognized the name. He'd seen it on bylines and editorial letters urging him for an interview. So this was the formidable Susan Ross, the one who refused to take no for an answer. Leon nearly laughed at the irony. She was unaware she'd corralled the very CEO she longed to profile. They'd hardly exchanged more than a few words when some colleague whisked her away for introductions. Leon took the lull to observe the ballroom, multicolored uplighting, ornate centerpieces, and a well-heeled crowd gliding across polished floors. A silent question echoed in his mind. Should I come clean now, or wait? Moments later, Susan reappeared, linking her arm casually through his as if it were the most natural thing. He found that small act strangely comforting. "I hope you don't mind," she said under her breath, "but you might need to handle a few introductions." "People here can be intrusive," Leon nodded with a cool smile. "I'll follow your lead." A cluster of well-dressed donors greeted them, politely inquiring about Susan's work at Atlas Now, and, inevitably, her charming companion. Leon answered with measured vagueness, letting Susan fill in the blanks, which she did without missing a beat, never quite saying he was an escort, but never denying it either. He admired her quick wit and the way she deftly parried any personal questions. One of the donors, a jovial older man, teased Leon, "So, you must be quite experienced in social events. Susan never brings anyone around." Leon offered a polite chuckle, careful not to say too much. In that moment, he realized just how protective Susan was of her own image. He sensed a guardedness about her that matched his own wariness of the public eye. When they finally broke away from the group, Susan exhaled quietly. "That was close. I'm sorry you got roped into all that talk. You're handling it well, though." Leon shrugged. "I've had practice dealing with high-pressure conversations." She raised an eyebrow. "Right. You mentioned something about a business background?" He nodded, again withholding details. If she truly recognized him, this charade would come crashing down. They were interrupted by another woman's approach, Rachel, if Leon recalled correctly. She eyed Leon inquisitively but turned to Susan with her camera in hand. "Photo op. You two look fantastic," she said. Susan hesitated, then nodded. They posed for a quick snapshot, the flash momentarily blinding him, As Rachel departed to snap more pictures, Susan touched Leon's arm lightly, guiding him toward the next table. "I still don't know how you ended up being my +1, but I'm grateful, really." He recognized genuine relief in her voice. "I figure I'll owe you more than just a thank you after tonight," she added, half joking. Leon gave a half smile, trying not to dwell on the fact that her words held a double meaning. I owe her the truth, at least, he thought. But maybe he could wait a little longer before shattering this curious illusion. Just enough time to see what Susan Ross was really like when her guard came down. The Rain City ballroom glowed with refined ambience, crisp white linens draped over round tables, soft jazz murmuring from hidden speakers, and guests milling about with practiced elegance. Susan led Leon through the throng, her posture poised, yet obviously charged with subtle tension. The entire evening felt like a performance, one that she'd choreographed down to the smallest detail, except now, her dance partner was an unknown, and as he guided her around other guests, she couldn't ignore the unsettling curiosity that gnawed at her. Pausing near a drink station, she turned to Leon with a carefully measured look. "You have a talent for blending in. I'd expect some nerves, but you seem perfectly comfortable." He met her gaze, the corner of his mouth lifting. "I've attended plenty of high-profile events. Let's just say I learned how to adapt." The hush in his tone hinted at an experience beyond that of a typical escort. But Susan reminded herself she had no time to pry. Tonight was about ensuring everything ran smoothly. She offered a cordial smile to two more guests who ambled by, greeting them briefly. "Focus on the magazine, not on him," she told herself. Still, her interest persisted. Over the next half hour, she tested him with subtle questions. "What do you think of the tech industry in Seattle?" she asked casually, handing him a canapé. He answered with insight that startled her, intelligent but not rehearsed, as though he were intimately familiar with cutting-edge developments. When she tried to pin him down about his background, he deftly sidestepped specifics, making her suspect he was more than just an escort. Meanwhile, across the room, Rachel kept snapping photos, eyebrows rising slightly each time her lens focused on Susan and her mysterious companion. Another colleague from Atlas Now, a junior editor named Marvin, approached Susan to gather details for a quick social media update. "Susan, we'd love a quote on this year's fundraising goals," he said, phone in hand. She quickly obliged, weaving a polished statement about philanthropy and artistic education programs. The entire time, Leon stood quietly by, exuding a silent yet compelling presence. When Marvin turned his phone camera on them for a quick snapshot, Leon offered a polite expression. After Marvin left, Susan whispered, "Sorry, you're really being thrown into the fire tonight." Leon chuckled, a low sound that sent a ripple of awareness through her. "I'm fine with heat," he said calmly, "as long as we're not in it alone." She caught herself almost smiling back before reining it in. What am I doing? Her usual strategy in social gatherings was unwavering composure. But around Leon, she found herself wanting to laugh, to push conversation further. It was a dangerous feeling, too personal, too real. She drew a measured breath. Let's circulate a bit more before dinner starts. They drifted among clusters of well-dressed patrons, exchanging polite nods. Despite her attempts to keep the tone professional, she felt an odd synergy with Leon, like they were sharing an inside joke, each mindful that the rest of the room was clueless about their improvised connection. Several times, she almost forgot he was supposed to be a stand-in. The quick-witted way he responded to any comment, the gentle courtesy he showed. None of it seemed forced. At one point, he steered her away from a pushy sponsor who was cornering her about possible coverage deals. "Crisis averted," he murmured once they were free, a flicker of humor in his eyes. "You're surprisingly good at this," Susan admitted quietly. Then she joked, "Unless you're a corporate mogul in disguise." Leon's gaze sharpened for the briefest moment, but he managed a light laugh. "I'll take that as a compliment." While the music transitioned into a slower tune, he guided her to one side, near tall windows showcasing Seattle's skyline. The lights outside shimmered off the water, creating a romantic backdrop. Susan almost felt her heart skip. But the moment shattered when a staff member announced that the silent auction portion of the evening was about to begin. Susan turned back to reality. She had responsibilities, people to greet, an image to uphold. She offered Leon a graceful nod. "Shall we?" As they walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that there were two people in this partnership, each hiding something. For now, though, the disguise suited her just fine, so long as it protected her from the vulnerabilities she'd worked so hard to control. The gala's silent auction was in full swing, a lively swirl of well-heeled patrons scribbling bids on clipboards for items ranging from luxury vacations to rare artwork. Susan could barely keep track of the flurry, but at least the evening's pace provided her an excuse to remain near Leon. Something about him piqued her curiosity. She couldn't resist probing deeper. They found a small cocktail table where she perched her glass of sparkling water. Leon stood across from her, posture confident, gaze intrigued. "So," she began, making her tone light, "if you're used to these kinds of events, you must have some interesting stories." He inclined his head slightly. "I might. What would you like to know?" She had to remind herself not to appear too eager. "Oh, just curious," she lied. "Is this your only gig, or do you do something else on the side?" He gave a half smile. "I dabble in multiple ventures," he replied, non-committal. "Let's just say I handle a lot of executive-level interactions." Susan tried another angle. "You seem calm under pressure. I'd guess you've dealt with your share of demanding clients. Doesn't it ever get exhausting?" Leon took a moment before responding. "Not really. I find ways to keep it interesting. Besides, a bit of mystery can make these gatherings bearable." He aimed the conversation back at her. "You're quite the expert at handling these big crowds yourself. What is it you value most about your role at Atlas now?" She raised a brow, noticing his strategic shift, but she answered candidly, "I love uncovering stories and shaping narratives, offering depth instead of just gossip. Sure, we do lifestyle pieces, but I push for substance where possible." She shrugged, glancing around. "I didn't climb the ranks just to churn out clickbait." He seemed genuinely impressed. "That's admirable. So your drive comes from—" "What exactly?" "Changing the world with journalism." She gave a wry smile. "Maybe not changing the world, but shedding light on things that matter. I believe in responsibility to the public." Her eyes flicked to a nearby bidder, holding up a form for an ornate painting. "Though tonight, it's mostly about wealthy benefactors and society pages, right?" Leon nodded in understanding. "Do you think that's who you really are? Someone content with superficial events and fancy dresses?" Something in his tone indicated more than polite curiosity. She bristled slightly. "This might look superficial, but these galas fund real programs for local arts education. I take it seriously, even if it feels forced sometimes." He leaned forward, resting his hands on the high table. "My apologies if I implied otherwise. I see your passion is genuine. I guess I'm just trying to figure out how you feel about all of this." He waved a hand at the swirling crowd, the glitzy auction, the swirl of cameras. Susan pursed her lips. "I do what I must. Every sphere has its politics, but as editor-in-chief, it's part of the job to mingle with potential sponsors." For a moment, they locked eyes. The tension brimming between them felt both intellectual and strangely intimate. She realized that, In a single evening, she'd had a more honest conversation with this man than with people she'd known for years. And she didn't even know his last name. Before she could delve further, a staff member called the auction's final minutes, urging everyone to place their highest bids. A violin quartet began playing softly, signaling a transition into the dinner portion. Leon offered her his arm. "Shall we see who wins these items?" She nodded, hooking her arm through his, feeling an unexpected warmth in the connection. Walking side by side, she commented in a hushed tone, "You're awfully good at asking questions yourself. Almost like you're investigative." He smirked. "Call it a habit formed from professional curiosity." She snorted a laugh, half amused, half suspicious. For a fleeting second, she wondered if he was scoping her out for some hidden agenda, the same way she was trying to figure him out. They passed Rachel, who aimed her camera once more, capturing the two of them chatting closely. Susan pretended not to notice. Despite all her caution, she felt a stirring excitement she hadn't experienced in a long time, an edge of unpredictability. She tightened her hold on Leon's arm, stepping into the soft glow of the next room, determined to learn more about this man who seemed to be hiding behind a professional mask as opaque as her own. Dinner was just winding down when a small commotion erupted at a nearby table. Susan watched as a slightly tipsy donor started complaining loudly about a recent Atlas Now story that had cast his investment firm in an unfavorable light. The man's slurred gripes drew stares, creating a ripple of awkward tension among the guests. Heart pounding, Susan mentally prepared for damage control. Before she could rise from her seat, Leon calmly stood and excused himself from their table. He approached the disgruntled donor, speaking in low, measured tones. Though Susan couldn't catch every word, she could see Leon's relaxed stance and the gentle tilt of his head, as though acknowledging the man's concerns without fanning the flames. Within moments, the donor visibly calmed, nodding along and even managing a sheepish smile. The crisis deflated as quickly as it had begun. Susan sighed in relief. She'd dealt with enough PR nightmares to recognize that Leon had just handled one with remarkable skill. When he returned, she offered a grateful smile. "Thank you, that could have gotten ugly. You stepped in like a pro." He shrugged nonchalantly, though he wore a trace of satisfaction. "I've had practice de-escalating tensions in corporate settings. People just want to feel heard." Her curiosity about his background only grew. At first, she'd hired an escort to avoid precisely this kind of scene, assuming he'd operate like a polite ornament. But Leon was no mere accessory. He'd quietly saved her from a meltdown. "I appreciate it. Honestly, I'm not used to having someone cover my back like that." He settled back into his chair. "It's kind of our job tonight, right? Helping each other out." There was warmth in his gaze, and Susan felt the odd sense that they were forging a genuine connection amid the artifice. Her rational side insisted it was just an illusion. Tomorrow he'd vanish, paid and forgotten. Yet a softer voice wondered if they'd only just begun to uncover each other's layers. As the dinner course cleared, the ballroom's lights dimmed. Guests were encouraged to enjoy coffee, dessert, and some gentle live music. The chaos of bidding, speeches, and sponsor networking had finally slowed, leaving an almost cozy atmosphere. Leon leaned closer, his voice quiet so only she could hear. "How are you holding up?" Still feeling the weight of the evening, Susan allowed a small chuckle. "I'm probably more relaxed now than I've been all week, thanks to you." She paused, then added, "You handled that investor like it was second nature. Are you sure you don't want to reveal more about your day job?" The faintest grin curved his lips. "Let's just say I'm used to high-level negotiations. I prefer to keep a low profile." She narrowed her eyes. "Low profile is right. You're practically a ghost online. I did a quick search on my phone just now and found nothing. It's strange." His grin deepened, but he didn't elaborate. Instead, he guided the conversation back to her. "So, Miss Editor-in-Chief, how does it feel to be the driving force of Atlas now? Ever think about slowing down?" The question landed with unexpected force. Susan took a moment to consider. "I've thought about it. Sometimes I realize I've given most of my adult life to this magazine. Then I wonder if I've missed out on simpler things." Her gaze dropped to the linen tablecloth, a rare flash of vulnerability. "But then again, I'm not even sure I'd know what to do with myself if I slowed down." Leon nodded thoughtfully. "Funny how we trap ourselves in these roles, right? We polish our reputations, set rigid standards, and sometimes forget there's more to life." Something in his tone resonated, as though he spoke from personal experience. A lull in the conversation, filled with the soft strains of violin music floating through the ballroom. Without quite meaning to, Susan found herself placing her hand on Leon's forearm. "You've been a better partner tonight than I expected," she admitted softly. He covered her hand with his own for just a second, a gentle, reassuring gesture that sent warmth tingling along her arm. "Likewise," he said, voice low. "I didn't expect any of this either." Their eyes locked, the tension between them tinged with mutual intrigue and caution. Here, in the hush following the gala's frenetic energy, it felt like they'd formed an alliance, improvised, yet unmistakably real. Around them, other guests began rising to mingle, but neither made a move. Time seemed to slow, as if granting them a brief moment to absorb the new connection they'd stumbled upon, a bond forged by necessity, but strengthened by a surprising, undeniable spark. By the time the charity's live auction reached its peak, Susan felt almost at ease. She'd been chatting with Leon in low tones, both of them sharing small confidences. It struck her as strange how quickly she'd grown comfortable with a man she'd only just met under such unusual circumstances. But the evening's elegance, combined with his calm presence, lulled her into lowering her guard. The auctioneer, perched on a small platform, was introducing a rare wine from a prestigious Napa Valley vineyard. "Starting bid of $5,000, ladies and gentlemen, all proceeds benefiting youth arts programs." Susan smiled politely at the host. Just one more item among many, she thought. The string quartet paused, and the crowd murmured with delight at the ornate glass bottle on display. Then came the moment. Susan stood near the table, showcasing that precious wine while attempting to answer an insistent sponsor's questions about future Atlas Now features. She nodded politely, leaning over slightly to catch the sponsor's words. At that exact second, someone jostled her elbow from behind. A minor bump, really. But it was enough to disrupt her balance. She felt her hip press against the polished tablecloth where the wine bottle rested on a narrow stand. In slow-motion horror, she saw the bottle's dark shape wobble. A heartbeat later, it toppled, shattering against the marble floor with a deafening crash. Wine splashed in a dark red arc across the tablecloth, staining everything in its path, including the hem of her satin gown. Gasps rippled through the audience. The sponsor stepped back, wide-eyed. A hush fell over the entire ballroom, the quartet faltering mid-note. Mortification flooded Susan. Her stomach lurched as if she'd been punched. For an instant, she froze, mind spinning with the disastrous headlines that might follow. Editor-in-Chief topples priceless wine at gala. She saw camera flashes on the periphery, her colleagues gaping in stunned silence. The charity's organizers rushed forward. Daniel Coleman was somewhere in the distance, grimacing. At once, Leon sprang into action. He wrapped a steadying arm around her shoulders and ushered her away from the puddle of glass shards and crimson liquid. In the confusion, he deftly intercepted a staff member who was about to make a scene, calmly saying, "We're so sorry, just an accident. We'll cover any damages." His words, while bold, seemed to hold weight. And in that moment, Susan realized that half the crowd was gawking. Heat flamed her cheeks. She wanted to defend herself, to assure everyone it was just a clumsy misstep, but all she managed was a stammered apology. Her eyes darted to Leon, who gave her a slight nod. "Let's get you out of here," he whispered, guiding her toward a side exit. Every nerve in her body buzzed with humiliation. Once clear of the prying eyes, they emerged into a quieter corridor, where the roar of conversation softened to a dull hum. Susan leaned against a marble pillar, heart pounding. "I've ruined this entire event." She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to steady her breathing. "I can't believe I did that," she finally managed, voice trembling with shame. All that planning. Leon placed a hand gently on her arm. "It was an accident, Susan. You're not the first person in history to knock something over." She opened her eyes, meeting his, and despite the humiliation, she felt a flicker of gratitude for his calm, grounding presence. In the distance, staff scurried to salvage the situation. A few curious onlookers peered down the corridor. Susan straightened, swallowing hard. I need to fix this," she said. "I can't just vanish, leaving chaos behind." Leon nodded, but he kept his voice firm. "Yes, but not while you're in shock." He gestured to the main foyer. "Let's step outside for a moment. Breathe, then you can decide how to handle whatever fallout comes next." She hesitated, her image-conscious mind urging her to return and apologize publicly, yet she could barely steady her racing heart. Leaning on Leon's arm, she allowed him to lead her down the corridor, away from the accusatory stares. Everything she feared, public scrutiny, scandal, imperfection, had crystallized in a single moment of shattered glass. Oddly, she felt relief that Leon was beside her, guiding her through the surge of panic. They slipped through a side door, unaware that this sudden exit would change far more than just the trajectory of the evening. Outside, the neon glow of Seattle's skyline and the damp air waited, ready to wash away the night's embarrassment and lead them somewhere uncharted, together. Stepping onto the sidewalk, Susan inhaled the cold night air. The drizzle had returned, a gentle patter misting the streets. She shivered slightly in her wine-stained gown. The shock of her mortifying slip-up clung to her like a second skin, leaving her unsettled and ashamed. Leon, still guiding her by the elbow, angled an umbrella over their heads. It shielded her hair from the rain, but did nothing to quell the storm of thoughts inside her. He led her to a nearby awning, where they could pause away from the direct line of any curious eyes. The muffled sounds of traffic and occasional laughter from passers-by reminded her that the rest of the city was continuing on, indifferent to her personal crisis. As they stopped, Susan leaned against the damp brick wall, looking at Leon's silhouette against the soft glow of a street lamp. "Thanks," she managed, voice shaky, "for getting me out of there." The hint of a smile tugged at his lips. "You had quite the audience. Didn't want to see you devoured by a roomful of judgment." Her gaze dropped to the ruined hem of her dress. "I shouldn't have fled. My boss and the donors. Everyone must be furious. This gala meant so much to the magazine's image." She paused, then swallowed. "I probably just made it worse for myself." Leon took a half-step closer, umbrella still poised above them. "You're allowed a human moment. Believe it or not, you don't have to be perfect, and I suspect most people get that." She nearly scoffed. "Not in my position. Failure isn't an option when you're editor-in-chief." Her shoulders sagged. "I spent years building a reputation for composure. One false move, and it's all undone." He shifted, his expression sympathetic yet unyielding. "You think highly of everyone else's judgment, but maybe you're being too hard on yourself." The sincerity in his tone caught her off guard. She recalled how he'd stepped in, calming the staff, trying to minimize the fiasco. His reaction suggested leadership more than anything else, certainly not the stance of a mere hired escort, yet she was too drained to probe his mystery again. A wry laugh escaped her, You sound like a shrink, or maybe a life coach. Rain tapped against the umbrella's canopy as Leon lowered his voice. Just someone who's been through public scrutiny. I know how it feels to be under the lens. It's easy to forget you're allowed mistakes. Susan blinked, absorbing his words. The quiet sincerity washed over her like the raindrops spattering the sidewalk. I almost believe you, she murmured, pushing away from the wall. She looked around, noticing how the lampposts created golden halos in the drizzle. A swirl of emotions threatened to overwhelm her. Embarrassment, relief, strange comfort. Come on, Leon said, gently touching her elbow. We can walk a bit. Clear your head. She nodded, grateful for the suggestion, so they strolled through the damp streets, heels clicking against wet pavement. She tried not to dwell on the crowd she'd left behind, on the aftermath she'd face in the morning. After a few blocks, they paused at a small neighborhood cafe that, to their surprise, was still open late. A neon sign flickered in the window. Coffee, Leon offered. Susan caught his eyes, noticing how close they stood, how natural it felt to share this moment away from prying eyes and glossy galas. I'd like that, she said quietly. Inside, the cafe was cozy, mostly empty. A single barista tidied cups behind the counter. Susan felt relief as she lowered herself onto a wooden chair, noticing how Leon settled across from her with an air of comfortable familiarity. The overhead light illuminated his face, and for a moment she saw a flicker of concern mixed with genuine warmth. I'm sorry your evening took a turn, he said softly. She shrugged, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Don't be. In a strange way, this might be the most real part of the night. He nodded, offering her a small, understanding smile. Steam curled from their coffee mugs, the aroma of roasted beans weaving between them. Confessions under the Seattle rain. Who'd have guessed, she mused. Setting her worries aside, at least for now, she leaned closer, ready to share pieces of herself she normally kept hidden. And with each word exchanged, the buffer of their assumed roles began to dissolve, leaving a raw, refreshing honesty in its place. They sipped coffee in comfortable silence, the quiet interior of the cafe a stark contrast to the evening's earlier chaos. The barista offered a friendly wave from behind the counter, busying herself with closing tasks. Outside, rain glistened on the pavement, reflecting the city's flickering neon lights. Eventually, Leon leaned back in his chair, sliding his hands around his mug as though absorbing its warmth. Susan noted how his expression shifted from concerned to introspective, almost somber. I get the sense, he began, that you've carried the weight of professional expectations for a long time. Susan traced the rim of her cup, eyes momentarily distant. You could say that. I started climbing the ladder in my early 20s. Moved from one newspaper to another, each step demanding more and more. Memories swam in her mind, late nights hunched over drafts, skipped vacations, and birthday parties missed. She felt a pang of regret. I guess I never stopped to ask if I even wanted a normal life. I just kept pushing. Leon's gaze flickered with understanding. And what about your personal life? Did you ever have a chance to... He let the question hang. Susan exhaled, recalling the pain of her last significant relationship. The arguments about her relentless schedule, the final parting that still stung. I tried, but it always ended with accusations that I'm married to my job. So, eventually, I quit trying, figured I'd focus on what I do best. An extended pause hung between them. Rain pattered against the windows, the ambient noise somehow soothing. Leon hesitated before speaking. My father passed away when I was younger. I was forced to take on responsibilities I wasn't ready for. And like you, I built walls to cope. People see me as a figurehead sometimes, someone with a powerful title. But inside, I've struggled to find my own equilibrium." His voice held a subtle tremor. Susan's eyes flicked up. Curiosity piqued. Father's passing, heavy responsibilities. She couldn't help but recall that Leon Butler, the elusive CEO, had inherited his family's company under similar circumstances. The parallel unnerved her. But she gave herself a mental shake. No use leaping to wild conclusions. Many business people shared such stories. "I'm sorry," she said simply, and it was the most heartfelt she'd sounded all night. He nodded, accepting her empathy. "It's not easy, trying to live up to someone else's legacy while forging your own path. There's fear in opening up, fear in being known beyond the professional facade." Susan managed a small, sad smile. "That's exactly it. And you know, tonight is proof of how fragile that facade can be. One slip-up, and everything I've worked for seems at risk." She glanced at her stained gown. "I'm still mortified, yet part of me is relieved I'm out here instead of facing that crowd." Leon reached across the table, lightly brushing his fingertips against hers. The contact startled her, gentle, reassuring, almost intimate. Maybe tonight's fiasco is a blessing in disguise, a moment to breathe outside the lines you've drawn for yourself. She felt a tightening in her chest, a conflicting swirl of desire and apprehension. If he were truly just an escort, would he speak to her this way? Her instincts insisted he was more, yet uncertainty kept her from pressing. She wasn't ready to shatter this fragile bubble of connection. Taking a steadying breath, she asked, "So what do we do next? Go back and face the music, because if the press got wind of this, my staff will be in panic mode." She half expected him to shrug off the responsibility, leaving her to manage her professional mess alone. Instead, Leon angled his head thoughtfully. "We should probably return soon, but if you need a little more time, let's take it. I'm not afraid of fallout." Those words tugged at her guarded heart. "You don't even know me," she whispered, almost apologetically. "Why should you care about my troubles?" His gaze held steady. "Maybe I see parts of myself in you, someone who stands alone at the top, uncertain if there's anyone to trust." A sad smile curved his lips. "I don't know. Maybe I care because I know exactly how lonely that can be." Emotion welled up in her, uncomfortably close to the surface. She couldn't help thinking that he was the first person in ages who seemed to look past her title and see the cracks in her armor, and for one fleeting moment, she wondered if she was ready to let him in, or if her past rejections and fears would hold her back. By the time they finally decided to return downtown, the drizzle had lessened to a fine mist. Susan's gown still bore stubborn wine stains, but she dabbed away what she could with a napkin. They walked side by side beneath Leon's umbrella, circling back toward the Rain City Ballroom's grand facade. The bright marquee lights reflected off the wet pavement, making the entrance glow like a stage set for a final act. As they stepped inside, the waning crowd was occupied with post-auction mingling. The shattered wine fiasco, while not forgotten, had seemingly been contained. Susan squared her shoulders, steeling herself for whatever reaction awaited her. Leon shifted slightly behind her, poised like he might intervene if tensions rose. Before she could take more than a few steps, Rachel appeared, ushering them toward an uncrowded corner. "What happened?" Rachel asked, voice hushed. "People said you had an accident and then left. Everything okay?" Susan nodded, exhaling. "It's as bad as it sounds, but we're back. I'll handle any fallout first thing tomorrow." Rachel gave a sympathetic nod, her camera still strapped around her. "I tried to keep the photographers away, so hopefully we control the narrative." Leon stayed silent, observing. Rachel gave him a curious glance, but refrained from prying. Just then, a text pinged on Susan's phone, an urgent message from Daniel Coleman. "We need to talk. Now." She felt her pulse spike. "I have to find Daniel," she murmured to Leon. "He's probably furious." Leon offered a gentle squeeze to her shoulder. "Go, I'll hang back." She appreciated the gesture. With a quick nod, she left him and followed Rachel toward a backstage hallway. She was halfway there when a figure stepped out from behind a set of floor-length drapes, a staffer who recognized Leon Butler by sight. "Mr. Butler!" the staffer blurted, eyes wide. I thought you were only here for a private meeting earlier." The words echoed in Susan's ears like thunder. She froze, mid-step, spinning around. "Mr. Butler." She locked eyes on Leon, an instant wave of realization crashing over her. The CEO of Butler Technologies. She'd read about him, Leon Butler, her chest constricted, shock and dismay flooding her at once. She watched as Leon, only a few feet away, visibly stiffened. His gaze flicked toward her, regret etched across his features. "Susan," he began, voice low, but words failed him. She stared, heart pounding as puzzle pieces slammed together, his ease with corporate donors, the quick crisis management, the air of authority. He was the elusive tech mogul she'd been trying to interview for months, the same man she'd inadvertently hired as an escort for the evening, her cheeks flushed with a mix of rage and humiliation. How had she been so blind? Swallowing thickly, she stepped closer, voice shaking. "Leon Butler, the one whose interview I've been chasing." He nodded, expression pained. "Yes, but—" She raised a hand, halting him before he could continue. For a moment, she couldn't form any coherent sentence. Shock and betrayal tangled in her thoughts. "He lied to me." She recalled every moment of the evening, the banter, his mysterious evasions, the coffee shop confessions. All under false pretenses, Rachel, sensing an emotional minefield, discreetly backed away. Leon made a move to speak. "Susan, I never intended to—" She cut him off, voice trembling. "To what? Deceive me? You let me believe you were some stand-in escort, and I opened up to you." He tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled back. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Daniel Coleman round the corner, momentarily startled by the scene, but hovering at a safe distance. Susan lowered her voice, waves of hurt roiling under her forced calm. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" His brow furrowed. "It wasn't planned. You came up to me, assumed I was your date, and honestly, part of me wanted to see how it would play out. I wanted to know you without the preconceptions people always have about me. I was going to tell you, but the chance never felt right, and then He stopped, realizing how feeble the explanation sounded. Tears of humiliation prickled the corners of her eyes. She'd been so vulnerable tonight, letting her walls down, trusting him. And it was all built on a lie. "I need to go," she murmured, turning blindly, half stumbling away. She managed to slip past Daniel without meeting his gaze. Leon's voice followed her, low and desperate. "Susan, wait, please, let me explain." But she was done listening. Hurt clamped around her heart like a vice. Everything, the chaos of the spilled wine, the frantic need to keep her image intact, now paled against the revelation that she'd been emotionally exposed to a man who wasn't who he claimed to be. She only knew she had to run before tears spilled in front of all these people. Her breath caught, and she hurried down the corridor, ignoring the questioning looks from staffers and guests. Her mind hammered with a single, painful realization. He was the one person she had never stopped trying to reach professionally, and he'd found his way into her most guarded corners, under false pretenses. Susan paced around her living room in the early hours of the morning, mind too restless for sleep. Her elegant gown lay discarded on the sofa, stained beyond easy repair. She hadn't bothered to hang it up properly after storming out of the Rain City ballroom. Everything felt tainted by the night's revelations, the shattered wine, the stares of the crowd, and worst of all, Leon's deceit. Opening her laptop, she stared at a blank document. The cursor blinked accusingly. She'd come home with the intention of drafting a scathing exposé on Leon Butler, how he'd masqueraded as her date, toying with her trust. After all, she had an ethical obligation to report the truth, didn't she? Yet her fingers hovered over the keyboard, unmoving. She remembered how he'd talked about losing his father, how his voice had trembled with vulnerability. She thought of the warmth in his eyes when he reassured her about the spilled wine. None of that had felt fake, and yet he was Leon Butler, the reclusive CEO she'd spent months chasing. For all she knew, he'd been gathering intel on Atlas Now this entire time. A pang of confusion wrenched her stomach. The ping of a text message startled her. "Susan, call me ASAP. Daniel Coleman." She let out a shaky breath. "Great, the magazine's in crisis mode." She dreaded the conversation. There was no escaping the reality that she'd unintentionally danced with the subject of a high-profile piece she'd been seeking for months. Fuel for gossip, a potential PR nightmare. For a moment, she imagined telling Daniel everything, how the night had unfolded, the genuine connection she'd felt before discovering Leon's real identity. But the memory of Leon's face clouded her thoughts. That pained look when she'd rejected his explanation. She couldn't forget the betrayal or the sense that she might be on the cusp of a colossal story. She tossed her phone onto the coffee table, deciding to ignore Daniel's message for the moment. Instead, she opened the search engine on her laptop, typing Leon Butler scandal, half expecting to find something damning she could latch onto. The usual articles about Butler Technologies' innovations and Leon's reticence with the media popped up, but no glaring scandals, no big revelations. Sinking into her leather chair, she rubbed her temples. What is the truth here? Was Leon's secrecy malicious, or was it a man's attempt at anonymity, finally letting someone see him without corporate assumptions? She recalled how he'd rescued her at the gala, twice. That didn't feel like manipulation. Yet the lie, the omission, it stung fiercely. A noise from outside drew her attention to the living room window. Seattle's skyline stretched under a still, clouded sky, the city quiet except for occasional headlights cutting through the dark. She thought back to the moment they'd shared coffee, how safe she felt unveiling her insecurities. He lied about who he was. But did he lie about that connection? Her gaze drifted to a photo of her younger self, smiling confidently at a graduation ceremony. You used to believe in fair reporting, in seeing the human side of every story, she reminded herself. Had she lost that perspective in the rush for exclusives and the pressure to maintain an unshakable persona? Compelled by a surge of guilt and confusion, she drafted a simple note on her phone. "Leon, I don't know what to believe right now, but I can't ignore what happened between us. Maybe you never meant to hurt me. I need space." Her fingers hesitated before she hit delete, deciding not to send it. Space was right. She needed clarity, needed to figure out if her integrity as a journalist and as a person could survive this collision of personal feelings and professional ethics. Rising from her chair, she realized that no matter how furious she was, she couldn't pen a hit piece without understanding the full truth. For the first time in her career, her heart refused to treat someone's life story as a mere vehicle for headlines. That fact alone unnerved her. She walked to her bedroom, leaving the laptop open behind her. Tomorrow, the magazine's demands would flood in. Daniel would insist on some angle involving Leon Butler. The city might buzz with rumors. But tonight, alone with her thoughts, Susan allowed herself the raw honesty she rarely showed. "I can't decide if I'm more hurt or more afraid of losing something that felt real." And with that confession echoing in her mind, she turned off the lights, letting the dark wrap around her like an uneasy embrace. Susan woke to grey daylight leaking through her curtains. She felt like she hadn't slept at all. her mind still spinning with the aftermath of discovering Leon's true identity. A sense of dread settled in her chest as she checked her phone. Dozens of messages lit up the screen, colleagues, PR contacts, and an especially urgent text from Daniel Coleman. "We need to address this Leon Butler situation immediately." She set the phone aside and headed for a quick shower, scalding water pounding her tense shoulders. How am I supposed to address it, she thought, when I can barely sort my own feelings? She was furious at Leon for lying, yet conflicted because part of her understood why he'd wanted anonymity. And above all, she knew the magazine hungered for a sensational angle on the biggest scoop of her career. By the time she arrived at Atlas Now's sleek offices, the tension was palpable. Passing through the glass doors, she spotted hushed conversations and sideways glances. She held her head high, determined not to show vulnerability. Inside the boardroom, Daniel stood at the head of a long table, arms folded over his chest. Rachel and a few other senior staff members were already seated, expressions tense. "Susan," Daniel greeted curtly, motioning her to take a seat. "I won't mince words. There's a rumor floating around that you spent the gala with Leon Butler, someone we've been trying to interview for ages, and you left the event under unusual circumstances." Susan's stomach twisted. "Yes, She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I wasn't aware of his identity when he showed up. There was a mix-up with my escort arrangement. I only learned who he was later, like everyone else." A flicker of skepticism crossed Daniel's face. "And since then, have you reached out for an exclusive? Our sponsors expect us to capitalize on this. Butler is huge news. If we confirm you had personal contact with him, the magazine's credibility soars." The conference room fell silent. Susan could almost hear her own pulse. She realized how close the staff was to conflating her personal crisis with professional opportunity. One of the editors chimed in. "We have sources claiming Leon Butler doesn't do interviews because he's guarding secrets at Butler Technologies. If you have anything at all, this is a game changer." Rachel glanced at Susan, her expression sympathetic. They both knew the moral quagmire, how far to push for a story when private lives and real emotions were at stake. Susan steeled herself, lifting her chin. "I'm not comfortable revealing personal details from that night. And as for a feature, we can't publish unverified rumors. If we run something, it has to be accurate and fair." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Susan, we appreciate journalistic integrity, but you have to understand the pressure. Investors are sniffing around, expecting fresh, high-impact content. Leon Butler is the talk of Seattle right now. Our competition would kill for any inside scoop." Another staffer leaned forward. "We also have potential leads that Butler Tech might be heading into a major acquisition. Public interest is massive. We can't ignore that." Rubbing her temple, Susan felt the weight of it all. "I realize the stakes, but I won't exploit a personal encounter." Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Exploit. That's what it would be, she reminded herself. She didn't want to reduce what had happened between her and Leon, however tangled, to mere headlines. Daniel exhaled, pacing a few steps. "Fine, but get us something. I won't let this slip through our fingers just because it's complicated. We owe it to our readers." With that, the meeting wrapped abruptly, leaving Susan stunned. The staff exited in a flurry, a swirl of ambition and tension. Only Rachel lingered, placing a hand on Susan's shoulder. "You okay?" she asked gently. Susan looked at her friend, voice subdued. "Not really. They want me to turn whatever happened with Leon into a story, but it's not that simple. Part of me wants to run far away from the entire situation." Rachel offered a half smile. "I get it. Do what you think is right." Then she slipped out, leaving Susan alone in the quiet boardroom. Leaning against the table, Susan felt the crushing reality. The magazine wanted an exposé, the world wanted answers. But for the first time in her career, she wasn't sure she could stomach turning her private turmoil into a professional triumph. Susan's day blurred with back-to-back tasks, but she couldn't shake the gnawing tension over Leon. By late afternoon, she found herself staring at her phone, half expecting him to call. The other half dreaded any conversation that would force her to confront her hurt, just as she was about to leave the office. A message buzzed in. "Meet me at my penthouse. I owe you an explanation, Leon." Her heart hammered. Part of her wanted to ignore it, yet she needed answers, if only to decide her next steps. So she grabbed her coat and slipped out, telling no one where she was headed. A short drive later, she arrived at an upscale high-rise in downtown Seattle. The doorman recognized her name and ushered her to a private elevator that soared toward the top floor. When the doors opened, Leon stood waiting in a sleek, minimalist foyer. Tall windows overlooked a twilight cityscape glittering with lights. He wore a simple button-down shirt, no tie, as though consciously avoiding any show of corporate power. The fleeting thought crossed her mind that he looked tired, maybe a bit haunted. "Susan," he said softly, stepping forward. She lifted her chin, arms folded. "Leon." Silence. The tension felt thick as fog. Eventually he gestured for her to follow him into a spacious living area, all glass walls and understated furniture. Once they were seated, he on one end of the sofa, she on the other, he took a breath. "I should have told you the truth from the start," he began, voice low, "but I had no clue you were the Susan Ross, the one behind Atlas Now, until we were already inside the ballroom. And by then," he hesitated, raking a hand through his hair, "I wanted to see who you were, without that journalist barrier between us." She pressed her lips together, trying to keep her voice steady. "You let me believe you were an escort. You saw how vulnerable I was that night, how I was trying to protect my reputation, and you said nothing." Anger flickered beneath her calm exterior. He winced. "I'm not proud of it. But for once, I got to be just a man, not the CEO with a target on his back. I like talking to you in an unguarded way." Then we connected, and I got scared that telling you would ruin it. His voice cracked. "Turns out, not telling you ruined it anyway." The sincerity in his tone tugged at her heart, yet she held firm. "Do you realize how compromised this makes me feel? Professionally? My magazine is demanding a story, and personally. I feel stupid for confiding in someone who was hiding a big truth." Leon's gaze turned haunted. "I get it, I do, and you have every right to be angry. But despite the deception, my feelings that night, those were real." He looked down, swallowing hard. "I know you didn't sign up for this, neither did I." Susan's eyes burned with unshed tears, her posture rigid. "Why did you contact me now?" she asked. "You know I could write an explosive piece exposing everything." He nodded, eyes meeting hers. "Because I want you to trust me, even if it's in fragments. I don't want to hide or run. If you need answers about Butler Technologies, ask me anything. I'd rather you hear it from me than from rumors." A sharp ache spread through her chest. He was offering her exactly what the magazine wanted, insider access. But the very notion made her stomach churn. "I'm not sure I can do that. It feels like a betrayal of what happened between us, or a betrayal of my job, maybe both." The tears she'd been fighting threatened to spill. He rose from the sofa, slowly approaching her end. "I'm not asking you to compromise your ethics. If you want a real interview, a real conversation, I'll do it, on the record, with honesty. But only if you believe in it too. Otherwise..." He trailed off, voice taut with emotion. They were close now, just a few feet apart. She studied his eyes, the same ones that had looked at her with empathy under the cafe's dim lights. A swirl of anger, attraction, and confusion paralyzed her. "I need time," she whispered. Standing abruptly, he let her pass, his face shadowed with regret. She paused at the elevator, glancing back. In the silence, she saw the vulnerability etched in his features. This was a duel of trust, hers in him, and his in her. "Is it already too late?" she wondered. Stepping into the elevator, she pressed the button, heart pounding. As the doors closed, she realized how terrifying it was that she wasn't sure if she wanted to run from him or run back into his arms. The next morning, Susan stared at the elevator doors of Atlas Now, steeling herself for another day of subtle interrogations and office gossip. She replayed her encounter with Leon in her mind, heart still raw. Entering the open workspace, she avoided eye contact, slipping into her glass-walled office before anyone could corral her with questions. Once she settled behind her desk, she scrolled through her email, noticing an influx of messages about Leon Butler. Colleagues clamored to know what angle she was planning. Daniel had sent multiple bullet points: potential leads, rumored acquisition deals, corporate expansions. She swallowed hard. "This is my job," she reminded herself. But at what cost? Her phone buzzed. Rachel, Susan, almost didn't answer, but guilt prodded her. She pressed the phone to her ear, whispering, "Hey, can this wait? I'm swamped." Rachel's soft tone belied the urgency. "Susan, you can't keep dodging me. I just want to check on you, see how you're holding up." A wave of exhaustion washed over Susan. "I'm not great. There's this friction between wanting to honor my professional duty and not wanting to betray Leon's trust." She glanced out the window at the gray Seattle skyline. "He offered me an interview, but it feels so complicated." Rachel exhaled. "I get that. Listen, you're the editor-in-chief. You can shape how we cover him. If anyone can find a balanced approach, it's you." Susan stared at a framed cover from her early days, her first major piece, one that had changed an entire conversation in the city. "I used to believe in fair, thoughtful journalism," she thought, "not tabloids or sensational hits." She murmured a response to Rachel, promising to talk more later, then ended the call. Moments after, a new email popped up from a junior reporter. Leaked rumors about Butler Tech planning a major philanthropic initiative. "Do you have inside details?" Susan rubbed her forehead, feeling the press of internal conflict. If Leon's truly opening up, he might be doing big philanthropic projects. That aligns with the generosity I glimpsed, but her personal wounds made her wary of trusting him again. Around midday, she left her office for a breather, winding through the corridors until she found an empty break room. She clutched a paper cup of water, staring into space. Suddenly, Daniel appeared behind her, clearing his throat. "We need to finalize next month's editorial lineup soon," he said, his voice unreadable. "Is the Leon Butler piece happening or not?" Susan turned, forcing composure. "I don't have enough verified content yet." "And I won't run a half-baked story." Daniel's gaze hardened. "Susan, the clock is ticking. The buzz around him is at a peak. We need to strike while the iron's hot." She bit back a retort, reminding herself that Daniel wasn't a villain. He just represented the magazine's pragmatic drive for impact. "I understand, but forcing a story could damage our credibility. Trust me. I'll do what's right for Atlas Now." She heard the subtext in her own words. "And for myself, too." Daniel eyed her for a moment, then gave a curt nod. "Just keep me posted. The board's anxious." Then he left, leaving the break room door swinging softly behind him. Susan exhaled, leaning against the counter. What is right for Atlas Now? The question hit deeper than usual. She recalled Leon's willingness to talk, to share the truth. Still, the personal hurt throbbed like a fresh bruise. The possibility of a fair, humanizing article beckoned. But so did the fear of being manipulated. We're both carrying scars, she realized. Me from relationships that fell apart. Him from constant media scrutiny and the weight of inherited responsibilities. Sipping her water, she closed her eyes and remembered how Leon had looked at her in the penthouse, regret carved into his features. For a moment, she let compassion slip through the cracks of anger. Maybe we're each just two people who never learned how to let our guards down without destroying something in the process. The thought steadied her. Gripping the paper cup, she decided she couldn't ignore him forever. If she wanted clarity for herself, for the magazine, she'd have to confront Leon again, but on my terms, she resolved. Because though the wounds they carried were real, maybe shining a light on them was the only way either of them would heal. Later that afternoon, Susan found herself typing and deleting the same email draft over and over. Each version addressed Leon, requesting a follow-up conversation, but the tones seesawed between guarded professionalism and half-veiled longing. Finally, with a frustrated sigh, she shut her laptop. This is ridiculous, she thought. I need to be real with him, not choreograph every word. Gathering her courage, she pressed a button on her phone. He answered on the second ring, sounding cautious. "Leon," she said, her heart thumping. Do you have time to talk in person?" A brief pause. "Yes," he replied quietly. "Name the place." She chose a small public park near the waterfront, figuring a neutral location might help keep emotions balanced. The evening sun tinted the sky with soft gold when she arrived. Leon was already there, leaning against a railing that overlooked the choppy water. Gone was the polished veneer of a CEO, or even that of the mysterious Escort. He looked simply like a man waiting, hands in his coat pockets, expression pensive. Susan approached, noting the uncertainty in his eyes. She kept a small distance between them, hugging her elbows. "Thank you for meeting me." He nodded once, searching her face. "I didn't know if you'd ever call." They watched the waves roll against the pier. A couple strolled past with a dog, oblivious to the tension hovering between Susan and Leon. Finally, she broke the silence. "I spoke with Daniel and the others at Atlas Now. They're clamoring for a Leon Butler expose, or at least some exclusive. I can't dodge them forever." His jaw tensed. "So this is about an article?" Her shoulders slumped. "It's about us too. What happened that night was personal. I don't want to exploit it, but the truth is, everyone expects me to capitalize on it, and part of me wonders if maybe a genuine interview, an honest profile, could be worthwhile for both of us." Leon inhaled deeply. "I promised you transparency if that's what you decide, but it has to be based on honesty, not tabloid spin." She nodded vigorously. "Exactly. If we do this, I want to break the chain of shallow reporting. I want to show who you really are. Not the myth, not the secrecy. And I'll write it with the same integrity I'd grant any story I believed in." A brisk wind cut across the water, making her shiver. Leon noticed and stepped closer, hesitating before gently placing a hand on her arm. "Then maybe it's time. I've hidden from the press, always fearing people would reduce me to a caricature or a scandal. But with you, I'm willing to try." Their eyes locked, that electric current between them igniting once more. Even in the hush of the evening, their mutual pain felt palpable. "Leon," she whispered, "I won't lie. I'm still hurt. You broke my trust, and I'm not sure how easily I can rebuild that. But I also know you're not a bad person. You just made a bad call." His hand slid from her arm down to her hand, interlacing their fingers in a small, tentative gesture of reconciliation. "I'm sorry," he repeated. "I can't change the past, but maybe I can break the chains I've put around my life. Not everything has to be a fortress." She swallowed, tears pricking her eyes. Together, they stared at the water, letting the moment calm them. The sound of gulls overhead and the faint hum of distant traffic served as a gentle soundtrack. At last, she cleared her throat, pulling back just enough to regain composure. "We'll do the interview carefully. I won't treat you with kid gloves, but I won't sensationalize you either. We do it face to face. Real questions, real answers. If it's not right, I won't publish." Leon nodded. "And we handle our personal feelings separately, but honestly..." A tentative smile ghosted across his lips. Susan managed a small one in return, relief easing some of the tension in her chest. They stood there for a few minutes, quiet but no longer burdened by the crushing weight of unspoken issues. The setting sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with promise. In that glow, Susan felt a shift. She might not fully trust him yet, but a door had cracked open. Perhaps the only way forward was to break free from their old patterns of secrecy and control. Together. 2 days later, Susan sat at her office desk, typing out a concise, bullet-point plan for the upcoming interview with Leon. She titled the document, "Butler Interview Guidelines," though she knew it was more than a simple Q&A. It was a potential turning point for her personally and for Atlas Now's editorial standards. Her phone vibrated repeatedly. Daniel and the board were itching for updates, but she ignored the calls for the moment. First, she needed clarity. She'd barely finished drafting her thoughts when Rachel poked her head in. "Knock, knock," her friend said. "Heard you've been working on something big." Susan gestured for her to enter. "Close the door, Rach." Once the door clicked shut, Susan took a breath. "I'm setting up an official interview with Leon. It won't be a takedown piece, and it won't be fluff either. I want substance, his personal journey, the company's direction, and the philanthropic projects he's rumored to be planning." Rachel's eyes lit up. "That's huge. And given everything, I'm assuming it's not just another story to you." Susan let out a half laugh. "No, it isn't, but I have to separate my feelings from my work. If this piece happens, it's got to be about truth, not a vendetta, not a PR stunt." Rachel perched on the edge of a chair, crossing her legs. "You've changed, you know. Months ago, you might have pursued this more aggressively, or you might have shied away to protect your private life. Now you're finding a middle path. Kudos." Her encouragement stirred a spark of optimism in Susan. "Thanks. I hope I can pull it off." They began discussing logistical details, how to conduct the interview in a controlled setting, how to protect the magazine from legal blowback if sensitive information surfaced. Rachel took notes on her phone, occasionally glancing at Susan with a proud grin. "This might be your best piece yet," she said quietly. "And not just because it's Leon Butler, but because it's you, your ethics, your perspective." A soft tap at the door signaled Daniel's arrival. He stepped in, brow furrowed. Susan shot Rachel a look, and her friend slid off the chair, offering a polite nod before exiting. Alone with Daniel, Susan felt a flash of tension but kept calm. "Close the door, please," she said. He complied, then turned to her, arms folded. "What's this I hear about you arranging an interview with Leon Butler?" he asked, tone probing. Susan pushed the printed outline across her desk. "It's happening. I'm doing it on my terms. Thorough, ethical, no cheap shots. If it pans out the way I envision, Atlas Now will have a groundbreaking feature. But I'm not going to corner him or exploit personal drama." Daniel scanned the bullet points, his expression unreadable. At last, he placed the paper down. "All right, if you can get him on record for an exclusive, that's a win for the magazine. But the board will want something compelling. Don't let him off easy. Readers want insight into the man behind the fortune." Susan nodded. "I understand, but I'm the editor-in-chief. Let me guide the tone. If we do this respectfully and thoroughly, we'll earn more credibility than any sensational piece ever could." Daniel considered her for a moment, then gave a slow nod. Fine. I'll trust your judgment. He cleared his throat, adding, just remember, we still need results. He left with less friction than she expected, leaving her alone in the hush of her office. Relief mingled with a new wave of anxiety. The stakes were high. If the interview lacked spark, the board might call it a disappointment. If it was too invasive, she might lose Leon's fragile trust. No pressure, she mused sarcastically. Her phone chimed, an incoming text from Leon. Any updates on scheduling? I'm ready when you are. She smiled, feeling a peculiar mix of nerves and warmth. Tapping a reply, she wrote, yes, we can set a time next week. Let's finalize details soon. Simple, professional, yet her heart fluttered. How is it possible that I'm excited and terrified at the same time? She rose from her desk, peering out the panoramic windows at the Seattle skyline. The sun had emerged from behind a cluster of clouds, casting the city in a bright glow. For the first time in what felt like forever, she sensed that she was moving towards something worthwhile, a resolution of the tension that had hounded her. I'm preparing for the final act, she thought, inhaling deeply. With or without a perfect script, she'd find a way to tell this story with honesty, and maybe discover her own truth along the way. A restless night left Susan rising early, her mind swirling with the upcoming interview. When dawn broke, she found herself reading through her notes at her kitchen table, a mug of coffee growing cold beside her. The hush of the apartment offered no distraction from the same questions turning over in her mind. How far do I go in revealing Leon's personal side? How do I remain ethical while acknowledging our history? By mid-morning, she'd reorganized her approach. The interview would blend business and personal insight, but she would refrain from anything that felt exploitative or overly invasive. If Leon opened up, she'd respect his boundaries. If he held back, she'd recognize his right to privacy. It was a fine line to walk, and her heart pounded at the thought of the final piece. On her way to the office, she stopped at a neighborhood cafe for a fresh cappuccino. As she stepped outside into the crisp Seattle air, her phone rang. She recognized the number, Daniel Coleman. Sighing, she answered, bracing herself. Yes, Daniel? His tone was uncharacteristically measured. I just got off a call with the board. We're all expecting this Leon Butler piece to be a significant win for Atlas Now. There's talk of featuring it as our main cover story next month. Susan's grip tightened around the cup. A cover story? That's a lot of pressure. I still have to meet him for the actual interview. Yes, a cover, Daniel reiterated. We need to stir excitement. Tech investors, philanthropic circles, general readers, everyone wants to know the real Leon Butler. If you can pull it off, it'll mark a turning point for you and for the magazine. Susan's pulse quickened at the promise and the threat woven into his words. Understood. I'll do my best. She could almost feel Daniel's nod through the phone. All right, keep me updated, he said before hanging up. Once inside the Atlas Now building, she headed straight for her office, drafting an editorial outline that placed Leon front and center. But she refused to let the corporate push overshadow her commitment to honesty. I won't blindside him, she vowed. For too long, she'd felt like a puppet to public expectations. Now she could reclaim her voice and maybe heal her own heart in the process. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Leon. She let it ring twice to compose herself, then answered. Hi, she said softly. His voice was clear, if a bit tense. I can meet tomorrow afternoon. There's a private conference room at Butler Tech that I can reserve, or if you'd prefer a neutral space. Susan glanced at her schedule. Tomorrow worked. Let's do it at your office. It might help you feel more at ease. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But remember, I won't shy away from tough questions. A short silence followed. Then Leon's quiet laugh. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Relief and nerves mingled in her chest. They agreed on a time, and she hung up, exhaling shakily. The biggest interview of her career, and her most personal one, was set for tomorrow. Through the rest of the day, Susan refined her questions, mixing topics about Butler Technologies' trajectory with deeper inquiries about Leon's motivations and philanthropic goals. Each question reminded her of the man she'd glimpsed, the one who'd walked with her through rain-soaked streets, listened to her confessions, and offered gentle reassurance when she felt cornered by her own mistakes. Evening fell, and she wrapped up her notes. She stared at her reflection in the darkened window, searching for hints of the old Susan Ross, the editor who prided herself on detachment. But she saw someone changed, someone who'd learned that vulnerability could be both a risk and a gift. Slipping into her coat, she left the office, deciding not to bring work home tonight. She needed a clear head and maybe a decent meal to face tomorrow's challenge. As she walked through the lobby, a wave of unexpected determination washed over her. For once, she felt more than just an obligation to deliver a story. She felt called to honor the truth behind it, both Leon's and her own. She wasn't sure how the final piece would land. There could be fallout, internal backlash, or even public scrutiny. But standing at the entrance of Atlas now, she realized she was ready to accept that risk. Tomorrow, she thought, we begin a new chapter, no pun intended. For the first time in weeks, she allowed a small, genuine smile to form as she pushed open the door and stepped into the Seattle night. The next afternoon, Susan checked her reflection in an elevator mirror as it ascended to one of the top floors of Butler Technologies. She smoothed an invisible crease in her blazer and squared her shoulders, forcing herself to breathe. "This is just another interview," she told herself, though her pounding heart claimed otherwise. The sleek elevator doors opened to a reception area with modern furnishings and large windows showcasing downtown Seattle. A polite receptionist guided her to a private conference room. The door was glass, but its blinds were drawn for privacy. Stepping inside, Susan found Leon already seated at a round table. Natural light spilled across the polished surface. He stood when he saw her, offering a tentative smile. "Hi," she managed, trying to appear calm. He motioned to a set of chairs where a folder and pitcher of water waited. "I cleared my schedule for the rest of the day," Leon said, his gaze steady. "No interruptions." Susan nodded, placing her notes on the table. "Same here." She took a seat across from him, laying out a recording device and a small notebook. "Ready?" He exhaled and nodding. "As ready as I'll ever be." She pressed record. Her voice, cool but kind, introduced them. "This is Susan Ross, editor-in-chief of Atlas Now magazine, speaking with Leon Butler, CEO of Butler Technologies. Today is..." She provided the date, formalities, then paused. "Leon, I appreciate you agreeing to speak on the record. Let's start with Butler Technologies. Many are curious about your rumored philanthropic initiatives." He leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. "I've spent years innovating in tech, but we're pivoting to deeper community engagement. Our biggest upcoming project is a scholarship fund for underprivileged youth interested in programming and design. My team believes in leveling the playing field." His tone carried conviction, and Susan felt a flicker of admiration. Over the next hour, they discussed the company's research labs, expansions, and the complexities of balancing innovation with public expectation. Leon spoke candidly, occasionally pausing to gather his thoughts. Each response felt measured but genuine. Susan jotted notes, occasionally interjecting a follow-up question. Then she carefully broached the more personal angle. "You've been famously private, Some might say reclusive. Why the sudden willingness to open up? He hesitated, gaze flicking from the recorder to her eyes. Truthfully, I've realized transparency fosters trust. People want to know the person behind the corporate veil. And I'm tired of hiding. Susan ventured further, heart pounding. Is that drive to stop hiding connected to your father's passing? You inherited this company young. A flash of pain crossed his features. Yes, I felt unprepared, so I built walls. But as the company grows, I recognize how crucial human connection is, beyond mere corporate image. I want people to see Butler Technologies as a force for good, not just another profit machine. She offered a gentle nod, forging ahead. You spoke earlier of philanthropic drives. Rumor says you personally fund homeless outreach programs, but never take credit. Why keep it quiet? Leon's lips quirked. Because I didn't want it twisted into a PR tactic. I prefer to help quietly. But maybe that was part of my isolation. Now, if it helps get more people involved, I'll step forward. Her chest tightened at his vulnerability, reminding her of their conversations outside the ballroom. She decided to turn off the formal question list, letting curiosity lead. You've mentioned isolation. People might find that odd. Successful CEO, resources at your fingertips. How do you reconcile that loneliness? Leon's gaze locked on hers. Loneliness doesn't vanish with success. Sometimes it amplifies, because it's harder to know who to trust. The air crackled with unspoken references to how they'd met. Her pen froze mid-word. Carefully, she ended the official portion. I think we have enough for the feature, she said, pressing stop. But I'd like to make sure we cover everything fairly. He exhaled, leaning back, relief mingling with vulnerability. I trust you, he said, voice quiet. Her throat tightened at the emotional undertone. Gathering her notes, she added, I won't publish anything exploitative. This piece will focus on your work, your outlook, and yes, your humanity. No sensational angles. Leon stood, stepping closer. Thank you, Susan. She offered him a faint, earnest smile. In that moment, it felt like they were reaping the first real fruits of their courage to speak honestly, to meet at the crossroads of professional duty and personal truth. With the interview complete, Susan spent a week immersed in writing. Late nights saw her bent over her laptop at home, tapping out sentences that blended the story of Butler Technologies' evolution with Leon's personal transformation. She wove in references to his father's legacy, his philanthropic drive, and the quiet but profound shift that had brought him into the public eye, however reluctantly. Throughout the process, she battled conflicting emotions. She found herself revisiting the night at the Rain City Ballroom, how everything had started under a false assumption. Yet revisiting those memories reminded her of how real their connection had felt once honesty surfaced. It was an unlikely foundation for understanding, but it was the foundation they shared. Finally, the draft was ready. Daniel and the board reviewed it with wide eyes and appreciative nods. They loved the balance, a compelling piece that revealed Leon's motivations without cheap gossip. To Susan's relief, they approved it for the cover story of the next issue. She sensed respect in their eyes. Even Daniel seemed uncharacteristically proud, clapping her shoulder in passing. Great work, he murmured before striding off. But something lingered in Susan's mind, the unresolved tension between her and Leon outside the professional realm. She'd kept a careful emotional distance in the article, but the piece's authenticity testified to a deeper connection they couldn't ignore. So, one afternoon, she found the courage to text him, "We should talk, somewhere that matters to both of us." He answered within minutes, "Name the place." Susan typed back, "Rain City Ballroom. After hours." And that was how she found herself slipping into the Rain City Ballroom on a quiet evening, well past the standard event schedules. The large space stood empty, echoing with memories of glittering chandeliers, murmured conversations, and that fateful crash of expensive wine. Now, only minimal lighting illuminated the dance floor, revealing a space both grand and strangely intimate in its emptiness. Leon arrived shortly after, pushing open the ornate doors and stepping inside with cautious curiosity. Their eyes met across the floor. Susan felt her pulse flutter, recalling their first meeting amid a swirl of misassumptions. Tonight, the swirl was gone. They were just two people confronting a shared history. She gave him a small nod, motioning for him to join her near the center of the polished floor. "I've been here once or twice since the gala," she confessed, her voice echoing softly. "But it always felt haunted by that night, the good and the bad." Leon's gaze drifted around the high ceilings. "Same. Hard to forget the place where I pretended to be someone else, where you knocked over a bottle worth more than some people's yearly salaries." A wry smile curved his lips. "Sorry. Had to mention it." She let out a breathy laugh. "I can't believe I can laugh about that now." They lapsed into silence, the tension tangible. Eventually, she swallowed hard. "I finished the article. It's going to print next week as Atlas Now's cover story." "I hope it does you justice." Leon nodded, eyes warm with gratitude. "I trust you," he repeated, stepping closer, the hush between them turning electric. "Thank you for giving the real me a chance, not the caricature the media usually paints." She looked down momentarily, recalling how he'd stayed by her side through the chaos of that night, even when things spiraled. "We both messed up that evening," she admitted, "but part of me treasures it. It forced me to see how I hide behind my own facade, pretending everything is perfect and under control." He reached for her hand with quiet deliberation. The contact stirred a familiar rush of warmth. "And maybe I needed someone to shake me out of my own isolation," he said softly, "to remind me that being human in front of others isn't a weakness." They stood there, hands entwined, gazing across an empty expanse that once brimmed with Seattle's elite. Now it was just them and the echoes of possibility. The silence stretched with a comfortable weight. Susan felt the tension of past hurts dissolving, replaced by a new sense of understanding, imperfect, uncertain, but genuine. She glanced at the corners of the ballroom, recalling the swirling dance of couples and sponsors. "If only they could see us now," she thought, "so much simpler, so much realer." In a tentative move, Leon tightened his hold, guiding her into a slow dance without music. They didn't need any. The quiet was enough, a testament to the distance they'd traveled from deception to something true. Neither knew how long they swayed there, but when they finally separated, their eyes sparkled with unsaid promises. For the first time since that fateful gala, it felt like they were returning to the same spot, not to repeat old mistakes, but to rewrite the narrative on their own terms. The following weekend, Leon invited Susan to a cozy bistro by Seattle's waterfront. No entourage, no formalities, just them. She arrived early, heart fluttering as she watched sailboats dot the horizon, their silhouettes drifting against the grayish-blue waves. Then she spotted Leon outside, hands tucked in his pockets, scanning the tables for her. His face lit up at the sight of her, and that simple expression eased her nerves. They chose a secluded corner inside, wood paneling and soft lighting, lending the place a warm ambience. A gentle murmur of conversation surrounded them, enough to provide background noise without intruding on their privacy. After they ordered, Susan leaned her elbows on the table, meeting his gaze. "It's strange," she admitted, a slight tremor in her voice. "After everything, I still don't really know how we navigate us." Leon reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I've been thinking about that too. We met under the craziest conditions. There's no rule book for this. He paused, exhaling. But I know I don't want anything superficial. I'm done with half-truths or keeping people at a distance. She offered a tentative smile. Same. My entire career, I've been faking total self-sufficiency. It's exhausting, never letting anyone see a crack. I thought it was necessary, especially after relationships that fell apart due to my workaholic ways. She squeezed his hand gently, feeling a small jolt of courage. But with you, I realized that vulnerability can be a relief. Their food arrived, momentarily interrupting the conversation. Once the plates were set, salmon for Susan, grilled chicken for Leon, they picked up where they left off. Over bites of dinner, they delved into the differences between her editorial world and his tech empire. They teased out their preferences for weekends. Hers for reading a stack of magazines, his for tinkering with prototypes or playing guitar in secret. Each discovery felt like a quiet revelation. Eventually, Leon leaned forward, his voice dropping. I guess the real question is, do we give this a chance? I know we said we'd keep personal and professional separate, but I'm not sure that line even exists anymore. Susan's cheeks warmed. If we do, there's going to be scrutiny, especially if people realize we started off with you as my quote-unquote escort. The media could twist that any number of ways. And inside Atlas now, some might think I've compromised journalistic integrity. He nodded, serious. Let them think what they want. We both know the truth. You wrote the story ethically, and I cooperated in good faith. That's the only contract we need, the honest one between us. A swell of emotion rose in her chest. She set down her fork, letting his words sink in. An unspoken question lingered. Are we brave enough to face whatever might come from a real relationship in the public eye? She remembered how fiercely she guarded her privacy, and how he'd spent years dodging interviews. Yet here they were, forging a genuine bond without any formal agreement or transaction, purely by choice. What about the secrets you still keep? She asked quietly, half teasing, half fearful. I can't promise I won't keep pushing for answers. He chuckled. That's fair. I'm not an open book, but I've learned that letting someone in doesn't have to mean losing control. It might actually mean finding real balance. She nodded, heart thumping. The sense of unity enveloped her, a feeling that they were on the edge of something profound and fragile. Their waitress approached with a warm smile, asking if they wanted dessert. Susan looked at Leon, eyes twinkling. Chocolate mousse, she suggested. He laughed. Let's do it. Once the waitress left, Leon shifted, clearing his throat. So, how about we make a promise right now? No contracts, no formal deals, just a mutual agreement to figure this out, one step at a time. Susan's pulse fluttered at the sincerity in his tone. She tapped his palm lightly. I can agree to that, one step at a time, grounded in honesty. For a moment, neither spoke, letting the weight of their words settle. It was exhilarating and terrifying, a new chapter penned by two hearts that had learned the value of truth the hard way. Their dessert arrived, sweet and rich. They clinked spoons playfully in a silent toast. Somewhere in the midst of that modest gesture was a simple but monumental truth. They were choosing each other, not because they had to, but because it felt right. And no contract could ever replicate the commitment forged by mutual respect and genuine affection. A week later, Atlas Now's newest issue hit the stands with a striking cover, Leon Butler, captured in a candid photo that conveyed both power and warmth. The headline read, Leon Butler, the CEO behind the innovations and the heart behind the business. Within hours, social media buzzed. Colleagues congratulated Susan on an article that struck the perfect balance, revealing depth without sensationalizing. Industry analysts praised the piece for its thoughtful perspective on leadership and philanthropy. Despite the frenzy, Susan walked into the magazine's auditorium that afternoon with measured calm. The staff had organized a small internal celebration, acknowledging the success of their philanthropic issue. They wanted her to speak briefly about the editorial vision. Pulling her thoughts together, she stepped up to a simple podium at the front of the room. Rachel stood off to the side, camera at the ready, and a few colleagues chatted excitedly in the rows of seats. Clearing her throat, Susan began, "Thank you all for your hard work. This latest issue represents what Atlas Now can achieve when we balance in-depth reporting with integrity and empathy, and I hope it sets a precedent for more thoughtful storytelling in the future." Applause broke out, and she smiled, scanning the room until her gaze landed on the side door, where Leon stood quietly, wearing a modest grin. Her heart skipped. She'd mentioned the event to him casually, not certain he'd show. But there he was, slipping into a corner seat, looking comfortable yet undeniably noticeable. The staff recognized him, exchanging surprised glances. A hush fell as he offered a respectful nod toward Susan. Trying to steady her pulse, she continued, "Thank you again. Here's to the next chapter of Atlas Now." Stepping down, she accepted a smattering of cheers and approached Leon, who'd risen to meet her. Quietly, away from prying ears, he said, "That was a great speech, short and sweet." She smiled, a rush of warmth replacing any lingering nervousness. "I didn't expect you, but I'm glad you came." They moved aside as staffers surrounded them, curious and congratulatory. Daniel approached, shaking Leon's hand. "Thank you for trusting us. The coverage turned out better than we ever hoped." Leon nodded, politely exchanging small talk while Susan looked on with pride. "Strange to think we were enemies of circumstance not long ago," she mused. After the informal gathering, most people dispersed, leaving behind only a few stragglers. Rachel snapped a photo of Susan and Leon standing near a large poster of the issue's cover, awarding them a playful wink. Susan felt a twinge of vulnerability, but returned Rachel's grin. Then, as the room emptied, an unspoken signal passed between Susan and Leon. Time to find somewhere quieter. They ended up in the corridor, next to tall windows overlooking the city. The late afternoon sun cast elongated shadows on the polished floor. Susan couldn't help noticing the ease with which he fit into her environment now. No more subterfuge or elaborate disguises. "So," Leon said softly, glancing at the framed covers along the wall, "you've made quite a mark on this magazine." She chuckled, leaning against the glass. "Took years of work. And I never pictured it leading to us." His eyes shone. "Life has a way of throwing the unexpected at us. Sometimes that's where real change begins." Susan pulled a small bottle of sparkling cider from a side table where the catering staff had left drinks for the celebration. "I know it's not a fancy vintage wine," she teased, recalling the fiasco that first night, "but I think this is more our style now. No pressure, no pretense." They popped the bottle and poured into 2 plastic cups. Leon lifted his cup, eyes soft with emotion. "To the unexpected," he said, voice resonating with all the twists that had brought them here. Susan tapped her cup against his. "And to honesty, wherever it leads." They drank, the fizz tickling Susan's nose, laughter slipping from her lips unguardedly. In that small corridor, overshadowed by the swirl of the day's triumphs and the memory of their improbable first meeting, they found something truly precious, a shared conviction that love, respect, and truth could emerge from chaos. Setting her empty cup on the windowsill, Susan slipped her hand into his. Outside, the Seattle skyline stretched toward the horizon, its shifting hues reflecting a city constantly renewing itself. Like them, a gentle rush of contentment settled over her. After everything, misunderstandings, half-truths, heartbreak, the bond they forged felt solid and real, and as they stood there hand in hand, they knew this was just the beginning. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.